you, but I was surprised when I realized that it's been almost 10 years since the last Hunger Games movie. It seems like they were coming out a little bit more recently than that. And I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing for this new prequel. Like when they finally brought back Jurassic World, it felt like there had been a lot of time between those two groups of films. So, I felt very much ready to revisit Jurassic Park. But with this, I gotta tell you, I was reluctant to revisit the Hunger Games. I was like, yeah, we did this. But I had to go because I was reviewing the film, and they gave me a very nice IMAX screening to attend, which was lovely. Free popcorn. Oh, I had a great time. And I have to say, even beyond that, I actually liked the film. So I'm glad that I went. And if you want to go to the theater, and you too are like, but do I want to revisit Hunger Games? I'm telling you to give it a whirl, because there's definitely some really great stuff in here. I am going to ask towards the end of this review, because it occurred to me while I was writing my notes out for this, if this is the new Fantastic Beasts, which would not be great. But I'm curious. I'm very curious to see how people react to this. I'm still, when I was watching the movie, I was like, do I like this? But when it was done, I was like, I kind of do. So it's a journey. It's a journey. All right, now speaking of the Hunger Games, I was never a big fan. I never read the books. I'm not a big book reader, so I read comic books, and I read newspaper, magazine articles, stuff like that. But I had never read the books. But I did get into the movies, not only because I was covering them, but because I enjoyed them. And I remember going to the traveling Hunger Games exhibition when it came to New York City, and I actually had a good time going to that. I went to the gift shop. I looked at all the costumes on display. I was like, this is nice. It felt very grand. And I think that's one of the things that the Hunger Games franchise, certainly in its best installments, has always had going for it. And I think this new movie very much has that. So just so you know what kind of Hunger Games movie fan that I am, and to calibrate our love of the Hunger Games, I'm going to tell you my favorite Hunger Games film. And you do too, of the originals, okay? And I think we all have the same one. And it's Catching Fire, which, has the best critic and audience scores to date. And I gotta say, after seeing this new movie, Catching Fire is still my favorite Hunger Games film. In fact, I don't even like very much the other Hunger Games movies. I mean, they were okay. I had fun going to see them because they were event films and they had nice moments, but I think they never recaptured the magic of Catching Fire. And so, on a positive note, I will say that the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is way too long a title, not good. I think I get the title, especially after seeing the movie, but it is not made for social media. But anyway, it's the runner-up. It's my second favorite Hunger Games film. And I think because it has a lot of the qualities of Catching Fire. So that's great. That's nice. It's nice that the franchise is back in the same arena, at least. Pun intended. Now, when I said that I saw the movie in advance, some of you already were asking me if Rachel Zegler's Lucy Gray is as good a protagonist as Jennifer Lawrence's Katniss. And to that I say, she's not the lead character of this film. That is Coriolanus Snow, played by Tom Blyth. And to switch the Hunger Games movie perspective to a male character is one of the things that makes this new movie feel fresh. I mean, I love that there are so many female-oriented projects that are coming out right now, and many of them are exceptional. But it is refreshing because the space has leaned so much in that direction to go back with this a little bit in the other direction. And especially also because Tom Blyth does such a good job. Now, I do wonder, with Snow very much representing the 1%, how that will play with the fans of a franchise that has, up until this point, focused on the 99%. I mean, you are supposed to cheer for him to some degree, and I don't really know if people will. I mean, you know what this is very much like? It reminds me of those Disney books, right? I've never read one, but I've seen them and they've captured my attention. Not enough to read one. I told you, I don't read books. But anyway, they tell the story from the villain's perspective. I tried to read a comic like that, the recent Maleficent one, and I didn't like that very much. I mean, this is much better than that. But anyway, this really is the Hunger Games told from the villain's perspective. And at first, though, I was like, I don't see how this guy's going to turn into the President Snow that we know from the original movies. I mean, he's certainly not going to turn into Donald Sutherland. That part's ridiculous. But personality-wise, I was like, I don't see it. This guy is noble and good. But by the end of the film, I was like, oh yeah, I'm starting to see it. So that was pretty cool, actually. I thought it was not only a villain origin story, but a sophisticated one, where the villain wasn't cartoonish, but I felt had a lot of nuance. I really liked that. I thought that was interesting. And I have to say, I also feel that Snow learned some excellent life lessons, which anyone would benefit from. And we'll discuss them in the spoiler review. I was like, I've been there myself, Coriolanus. But when you equate them with a villain, well, then of course it makes one a little uncomfortable. And so people might be reluctant to learn from Snow, even though, again, as I said, these are some good, life lessons that anyone would benefit from. Something else that made me a little uncomfortable watching the movie, with the current global and political climate in real life, it was harder to enjoy the Hunger Games themselves from an entertainment perspective. I mean, of course, it was always social and political commentary, but it was still more also escapist fare. Here, they seemed crueler and more frightening watching them today. But I also felt the same way when I rewatched Gladiator a year or so ago, where people were also in real life forced to fight to the death in an arena for entertainment. I was like, whoo, good thing, it's like Twitter, but a whole lot worse. So today, the Gladiator or the Hunger Games scenario doesn't seem anymore like it's safely in the past. Like, oh, that wouldn't happen now. You're like, oh, this could come back. So it makes it a little bit of a harder watch. And so maybe that's one of the good reasons that the Hunger Games themselves are only about 45 minutes to an hour of the film. And then the rest of it is like setting it up. And then, I don't want to give anything away, but, there's an extensive story after that. So going into this film, a couple of things made me nervous. This is why I was reluctant to revisit it. I was like, is there any point to this prequel story? Do I really want to go back to the Hunger Games, as I said? The very long runtime, 2 hours and 45 minutes. I'm like, oh man, I like a long movie as much as the next person, but I think it's getting a little out of hand. Not every movie needs to be super long. Rachel Zegler, who, I think, has not quite connected yet with the majority of audiences, although she certainly has a very strong legion of fans. And then also, I'd heard there was a lot of singing in the movie. And, I don't care for singing for the most part. And I'm happy to report, as I said, that none of these actually ended up being an issue. So let's discuss, again, with no spoilers. The prequel ends up being a good idea because it throws us back into the heyday of the Hunger Games with the glamour of the Capitol and the Hunger Games themselves back in full swing. The original setup for the franchise that they kind of got away from is they had a rebellion, and the franchise, I think, kind of lost its focus a little bit. The districts are okay, but obviously it's always been the pomp and circumstance of the Capitol which has made the Hunger Games franchise distinct. And those elements are extremely well done here. I loved it. Especially at the very end of the movie. Don't worry, no spoilers, but at the end of the movie, the new gold logo comes up and it's animated and you hear the birds screech and the scores, the music swells. And I was like, this franchise might be back. That was a great moment. I love that. It was great. I always told you how you leave a theater is really influential about how you feel about the movie you just watched. And I left on a high note. I'd even watch a sequel to this prequel. It gets so confusing with this new trend of prequels. But, whatever. I do like being in the world of the Hunger Games, especially when they focus on the catching fire, Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes section. As for the runtime, I'm happy to report that the movie never dragged, at least for me, especially because it has so much ground to cover. I've seen some people say maybe it should have been split into 2 movies. I don't know about that. I think then maybe it would have dragged. I think it moves along quite nicely. In some ways, it kind of reminds me of a young adult version of Dr. Zhivago, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. So maybe that's another reason that I enjoyed The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Then with Rachel Zegler, while at first her thick Southern accent seemed extremely contrived, like very eye roll, you're like, are we really doing this? Because like Lucy Gray, from what I can gather in the book, because I looked it up afterwards, she's written as a character from the Deep South, similar to the vibe that Jennifer Lawrence brought to the original movies. But the way she's portrayed here, by casting Rachel Zegler and the style of her costumes, etc., well, to me, she came across as very Romani. And so I think she'd have an accent and be more representative of that region than the Deep South. It just seemed like a disjoint. It seemed like they just made that choice because of the books, and you're like, but I'm not seeing that in the movie. So I think it would have benefited the movie and Rachel Zegler's performance dramatically if they had gone with the Romani angle. And it would have, I think, also added a fresh new element to that, particularly because Romani characters have always been, poorly portrayed in the past with like Wanda and Nightwing. So I think fans would have liked that a lot, and it would have given them something to discuss about the film. And also, maybe it would have made the 99% side of the story feel a little bit more authentic than it does. Maybe that's interesting. The 1% side feels very authentic with Tom Blyth's performance, but Rachel Zegler, I don't think connects to the 99% like Jennifer Lawrence did. But as the movie went on, and I became more used to her creative choices, and she did do a nice job, right? Like, I don't think she could have carried this movie herself. Tom Blyth does, and so does some of the Viola Davis. We're going to talk about her. Oh, so good. But I think that Zegler is an okay, supporting-ish female lead. I think she did a fine job. As for her songs, thankfully, they are not big production numbers, and she's very much singing. She's a performer. And they're over pretty much right after they start. So I was like, woo, thank goodness. I didn't care for the songs that much. I thought they were okay. And I felt that Zegler did just an okay job with them. She comes across, because again, this speaks to the authenticity angle, she comes across more as a musical theater student who is playing a person of the people rather than actually being a person of the people. She very much seems like an acting student. They're like, your character is from the deep south, and she has this colorful dress on, and she likes to sing. And Rachel Zegler's like, okay, yes, and. So you're like, all right. Like, she just didn't seem like the character. But it didn't hurt the movie for me. Again, she was fine. She was fine. And again, the songs, they were fleeting. So I don't think she hurt the film at all. However, when it comes to the songs, I did have a problem with the Hanging Tree song, which I totally realize is from the original movies. But for some reason in this movie, because they seem to really focus on it for some reason, I'm not sure why it stood out more here. But I particularly noticed the similarities to the 1939 song Strange Fruit, which when the song first debuted in the original movies, that comparison was also made. Maybe also because, where we are today, politically and socially, I just felt uncomfortable about drawing a parallel to a real-life song about lynching in a fantasy story where there are no main black characters, particularly on the district side. I mean, they have them, and it just seems like, it seems very condescending. They're like, oh, yes, they're going to have their moment. And you're like, but what if they were like, a main character who actually had like some real scenes? And they're like, well, no. And you're like, it just didn't sit right with me. I was like, that is a really iconic and powerful and important song, and I don't really think you should borrow it for your fantasy franchise. But Viola Davis is, of course, in the film, and she is actually the best thing in it. So good. Even better than Tom Blyth. They're a good combo, but she is so good. Her villainous performance is deliciously over the top. You know what I would say it's a little bit like? It's like Meryl Streep in The Devil Wears Prada. I thought it was that instantly iconic. Her costumes, her hair and makeup, her performance. She is exactly what The Hunger Games is. She brings the vital flair to the movie that Elizabeth Banks and Stanley Tucci brought to the original films. Now, sure, Jason Schwartzman is also in the movie playing Stanley Tucci, aka Caesar Flickerman's, I think his father, right? I think that's who he's supposed to be. And the resemblance is uncanny. That's great casting. But Schwartzman, while excellent, his role is substantially more muted than Tucci's. So Viola Davis is really, she's the special sauce. So good. And then as for Peter Dinklage, I thought he was actually not good. He provides no depth to his character, and to me it was just a flat, lazy performance. I think his character was like supposed to be annoyed, but I was like, he's just angrily walking through this movie, and I was disappointed. As for the Snows, speaking of Game of Thrones, they come across very much like the Targaryens. You got Peter Dinklage there, you've got their platinum blonde hair, they're called Snow, like Jon Snow. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And Tom Blyth certainly cuts a dashing, sympathetic figure, especially in the first half of the movie with his soft platinum curls and elaborate outfits. He has one that I really like that sort of has a kilt over his pants, which evoke some of today's genderless male fashions. I was like, Coriolanus Snow is cutting edge, very much cut from today. Most people might not know who Tom Blyth is going into this film, but I think when they come out of it, they'll be a fan. I think this could really help his career, and you might see him level up indeed, much the way Jennifer Lawrence was helped by the original Hunger Games films. I don't know if this is going to do Rachel Zegler any favors, because I think she's already very well established, and she doesn't disappear into the role. So it's really, I think it's just something that Rachel Zegler fans will get to enjoy. And Hunter Schafer from Euphoria stands out, I think, as Coriolanus' cousin Tigress, even though her role is on the small side. But whenever she's on screen, she really grabs your attention, and there's no small roles, only small actors, and Hunter Schafer is not a small actress. She's very big. She's great. I totally forgot that she later turns into an actual tiger. I wish they'd hinted at that a bit more, and how important she is going forward. I mean, you just kind of don't get it from the movie. I mean, unless you really know your Hunger Games mythology. Finally, Josh Andre Rivera, also from West Side Story. He's awful. I hated his performance, and I hated his character. His character is a walking death trap who is totally unrealistic and therefore hard to sympathize with. Although maybe some people will really gravitate towards him. But I mean, I never understood why Coriolanus was his friend to begin with. I was like, this guy's just a walking liability. He reminded me of Paul Bettany's character in Master and Commander, just constantly complaining with no solutions, doesn't offer up any solutions, and is constantly causing problems for the lead character and putting them in danger. It's just a mess. Now, I don't know if that's the way the character came across in the book, so I don't know if it's the fault of the character from the beginning or if the screenplay messed him up. And then also, I didn't think Rivera's performance was very good. Like Dinklage, almost no nuance. I just really did not enjoy that character. Behind the camera, director Francis Lawrence is back, having directed 3 of the 4 original Hunger Games movies. He reteamed with Lawrence shortly after for the absolutely awful and offensive Red Sparrow, and I think that film hurt both of them. I think they're both still recovering from that, in fact. Would the Hunger Games franchise benefit from a more action-oriented director? Maybe, but then it would be a very different franchise. As I said, it's more Dr. Zhivago meets Gladiator instead of John Wick. And, who can compete with John Wick? So I think it's right to take this approach. And Lawrence does give this film, just as he did Catching Fire at least, an epic, romantic, historical quality, even though it is fictional. It does, again, seem very rooted in real-life commentary. And to his credit, when it comes to the action, there is one 360 shot. You'll know it when you see it, which is pretty incredible. For one moment, I was like, oh, I see the green screen. But for the most part, I was like, beautiful, Lawrence. Nice job. But if they do make any more of these Hunger Games films, I do think it would benefit the franchise to switch up directors. It's like the Harry Potter movies, right? Where they kind of became stale after a while because David Yates directed all of them and he didn't take risks because the studio became afraid of risks. And so I think that the same thing could potentially happen here. And as I said, that's what made me think, hey, wait a minute, is the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes the Fantastic Beasts of the Hunger Games franchise? They're both prequels. They're both trying to recapture the original magic with younger versions of some of the older OG characters, original characters, and then also adding new characters to the mix. I mean, they're actually very similar when you think about it. At least the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is more focused, with one storyline. I think having 2 divided storylines was really the problem for Fantastic Beasts. So there's just one storyline here that's streamlined and much less confusing. And Coriolanus Snow is the lead character, whereas Dumbledore was stuck being, deep supporting, at least when the Fantastic Beasts movies started out. Dumbledore clearly should have been the lead from the beginning. But anyway, the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I'm happy to say, is much better than the first 2 Fantastic Beasts films, in my opinion. But I would say that I feel it's on par with The Secrets of Dumbledore, which I enjoyed, although, again, that was more confusing. But I liked that movie, and it had solid audience scores. But it came too late for that franchise. And some people genuinely didn't care for it. So that's why I'm not sure how people are going to react to this film. We'll see what happens, right? And as I said, I got to see it in IMAX, and some of you have asked me if you need to see it on a premium screen. I don't think you necessarily need IMAX. But I do think a premium screen would benefit your experience. Not only because, the movie is so lavish, so you want to treat yourself, right? You want to have a lavish experience yourself? Go for it. Go have a good time. Take yourself to a nice dinner before or after as well. Dress up a little. I think you'll have a good time with that. I put on the closest I felt I had to, this is my ode to not only songbirds and snakes, because I have some birds on this shirt, but also I like the red in Viola Davis's signature costume. So I was like, this is what I'm going to go with. It makes me feel very happy. It makes me feel very Hunger Games. So you should do the same. That's what I would do. Because I would go premium. Dolby or IMAX or, whatever the premium theater you have near you. I think that's what I would go with. So that's my non-spoiler review of The Hunger Games, prequel, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Such a long, ridiculous title. But I ended up having a really good time. And the more I think about the movie, having seen it, the more I think of it fondly. All right, so again, as I said, that's my non-spoiler review. Share your own thoughts down below. Subscribe today. And of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.